So we're looking at obviously I shared with you guys I no Chris tonight because he has to practice for worship. I guess that's an important thing for the band to know what they're doing. And so we're reflecting on the plan, the resurrection this week, and one of as I was reading through this plan, one of the things that I wrestled with, and for you guys who have been here before, that these plans aren't always my favorite. Sometimes they're better than others, and sometimes they're equally as good, but I don't connect to them as well. And I think we all kind of will experience that as we read Scripture. And so this was one of the plans that I would say I didn't connect with terribly well. It was largely focused on apologetics, I think, and kind of defending the physical proof and the evidence for the resurrection. And that's just not something I think that I was largely needing, and it's not something that I often question, is the validity of the resurrection. I kind of did my work on that just growing up, right? And kind of deciding, do I believe that Jesus Christ rose from the dead or not? And as I wrestled with that, and I did wrestle with that before, and things like this would have been useful for me, that's not really something that I wrestle with anymore. There are other aspects of my faith that I wrestle with, and other aspects of what do I believe the Bible means or says that I wrestle with. But the resurrection isn't really one of those. And I was one of the things that does stand out to me, and one of the importances of this is I remember being a part of a lot of high school trips. And there's a trip that we always took called Awestruck. And we went to Indianapolis or Crown Point, Indiana, and some different spots. And students, we would always do a Q&A night. And this is kind of a common thing. And students would often ask the question, right? Why do you believe? What's the cause of your faith? Or how do you know this thing is true? And it's really interesting, the different answers that pastors and youth directors and all these kind of different people give, because people really reason it out differently. And there's a pastor, Pastor McLean, Dave McLean in Indy, who is just a fantastic guy. And his answer was the resurrection, right? His answer was, I researched, I prayed about the resurrection. And once the resurrection held up, once I could rely, and once I was confident that the resurrection took place, everything else didn't really matter. So if we want to talk about, did this happen in the Old Testament? Did that happen in the New Testament? Here's the deal. If Jesus Christ rose from the dead, then everything else starts to fall into place. Because Jesus quotes parts of the Bible, Jesus references other things. You may not know exactly what they mean or what exactly happened. But if Jesus rose from the dead, I'm following that guy. Nobody else has done that, right? Nobody's done it before then. Nobody's done it since then. And so if he rose from the dead, now my kind of goal shifts from, is this stuff real, to what am I going to do, and how am I going to work out what exactly I believe is true in other areas? But it's not going to, that's my faith, right? I'm going to follow the guy who rose from the dead. And so I appreciate the apologetics, but I've kind of worked on that. I did like the fourth day. I think it was the fourth day, and he just kind of referenced that everything changes with the resurrection. And I don't know that we always understand like the depth of that, right? This curtain in between, kind of holy places in the temple, tore when Jesus rose from the dead. This concept that that we were separated from God and kind of unable to be near God, unable to be connected to God, that kind of concept tore and was gone as that curtain tore. And so we're welcome to be with God. We're no longer separated from God because of the resurrection of the dead, because of that separation. And you just start thinking about the practicality of this. God wants to be with us. He enjoys being with us, and we don't have to sacrifice, right? We don't have to um, be afraid. We don't have to, in the Old Testament, if you went into these holy place, most holy place, you had to be pretty scared to go into those places, right? Because you weren't anywhere near God's level, right? And we're still not. But that sacrifice has made us pure, right? That reality between kind of us and God has shifted and changed to us being forgiven, loved, holy people through Christ's death and resurrection. And I just think about how my relationship with God is affected by that. And I've shared this with you before. I often view God as this rule giver. I often view God as this person who I need to follow or else, right? Um, and and that's not, as you look at the resurrection, there's an aspect of that that's true, but that's not the full story. That's not where we are anymore. This is we have the opportunity to have a relationship, to know him, to talk to him, not just from this fear and reverence kind of side, but from this being a part of the family side. And not that every family works perfectly, but if it were, and if you got to have those direct conversations. And so realizing that kind of everything has changed, I think, is a tough thing to do, and it's tough to reflect on and remember that regularly. And I'll go along with that a little bit. Obviously the reality of my relationship with God has changed. The reality of our relationships with God has changed. The reality of death winning has changed. But even kind of going forward instead of looking backwards, when I look at what I'm willing to do for God, if the resurrection had changed, or had happened or hadn't happened, I mean, it's a whole nother, in just the way I reflect on it, it's a whole nother level, right? If Jesus Christ rises from the dead, what do I have to be afraid of? I mean, I remember going to Belize a few years ago, maybe 6 years ago now at this point. I don't know, it's been a while. And I remember talking about what I remember the topic coming up of, I'm somebody being scared, right? Or something dangerous happening. And somebody's saying the line, hey, we're going to a place, we're going to go help God's people, we're going to go accomplish God's mission. He's going to take care of us. We're going to be okay. And I remember thinking about that and just being struck by that, kind of how deep that really goes. I don't know if this is what they meant or not, but if you mean like we're going to live, that's not necessarily true, right? We might go and serve and die, right? It's happened to plenty of Christians who serve God fantastically. I don't know if that's a word, but we made a one tonight. But we're going to be okay because death doesn't beat us, right? And if death doesn't beat us, then what else am I going to be scared of? Like what? And it happens all the time, which I, is the area where I need to wrestle and reflect, right? If Jesus Christ rose from the dead, it changes everything. I have nothing to be afraid of. Literally, death isn't a deterrent, much less people thinking less of me, or me being embarrassed of saying something or acting some way. Or me being afraid that I'm going to fail, right? I mean, if you just kind of carry it to its extreme, right? If I try something, it doesn't go well, and I lose my job, and I don't eat, and I die, well, I'm not afraid of death. So I'm not afraid of the last thing, right? If it's what God is kind of calling me to do. And so, yeah, that's been a big reflection of mine as I was kind of looking at this passage. And it is interesting because there are so many things that still stop me from following God. And there are things that are way less than death. It's inconvenience. it's just my own preference and things that I'd rather be doing. And I'll kind of finish some of my reflections with a sermon series that I've been listening to. There's a pastor down in Texas at the Village Church. His name's Matt Chandler, and he's been doing a little sermon series on the resurrection. So I've been kind of walking through a couple different sermon series at the same time. And he was just talking a little bit about God's wrath and how we all choose to live under God's wrath. And we all choose to make ourselves our own gods. And in that, we kind of say, hey, God, I know this is what you want. I know you rose from the dead. I know you exist. Guess what? I don't really want to do what you want me to do, so I'm not going to. And that always happens, I mean, to a degree, but God, this is one of Chris's and I's favorite phrase, but God isn't satisfied with that. And he knows that we're going to rebel, and he knows that we're going to try and make ourselves idols, and we're going to try to be God. And he just pursues us over and over and over, right? And I mean, that's, again, the beauty of this resurrection is he pursues us with such vigor, he pursues us with such passion that Jesus is willing to lay down his life to save us. And that's where my, I think, reflection really starts to hit home, and what I'm trying to work on personally is saying no to him less. And it's surprisingly difficult, whether it's a restoration of a relationship, whether it's a hard conversation, whether it's forgiveness of somebody, whether it's, not being deceitful in a certain area, whether it's not being lazy in an area. There's so many areas, so many things and I'll tell you what, it's even, reading the Bible and spending time in prayer, on a regular daily basis. I know that, that should be happening. Plenty of days I just say no. And looking to the resurrection, being aware of the sacrifice that he makes for me because of his love for me, to free me from the sin that I was living in that brought God's wrath on me. I really want to trust that this is better than going back over here and living in the wrath and living in a world where I try to make myself God and do what I want to do instead of doing what he wants to do. But man, it's hard. It's hard. And so that's one, I'm just trying to reflect on that more and to reflect on how good he is, rather than just trying to get myself to find a set of rules, because in my opinion, that doesn't work. So I'm trying to think about what he does for me and how I can put my response into plans, so I can actually potentially make progress in that area.